That's a difficult question because I'm kind of in that in-between phase of I don't know who I am yet.
Hello and welcome to the Catching Up podcast with Ananya and Katrina, two college friends who are doing their best to keep catching up while pursuing their goals and dreams. So Emily is my longtime friend from middle school, so we've known each other since we were probably like 11 or 12. Emily, do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
That's a difficult question because I'm kind of in that in-between phase of I don't know who I am yet. Yes, so I am a grad student. I am doing my master's in mechanical engineering and PhD in engineering education. So that's kind of my biggest part of me right now. I like to play pickleball. I have a much smaller, less exciting podcast on the side that I have been doing for fun, a little bit less consistent than this one. But I kind of just like to explore this stage of life where we are just, in my opinion, a little bit clueless, and I think it's interesting to talk about that with people and think about it. So it's kind of what I spend most of my free time doing.
Yeah, well, we are also kind of clueless.
Very clueless.
Everyone is. If you're not clueless at this stage, I think you're doing something wrong, honestly.
That's fair. That's fair. So, Emily, you're doing your PhD and your master's right now, and Ananya and I are both working, like, in corporate jobs. And so can you, like, talk a little bit about how you decided to go down that route? And, like, is that something that you were always planning on doing? Or is it just, like, kind of things happened when they needed to happen?
Yeah, I mean, if you would have asked my freshman year self if grad school was on the table, I would have honestly laughed in your face. I always kind of thought that grad school was a waste of time because I didn't really know much about it, but I wanted to get my engineering degree in and out and go make money and call it good. And to me, like, engineering school was all about ROI. Like, I wanted to make sure, like, it was going to be a grind, but, like, I could get, I would have a lot of job opportunities. So I kind of figured I can go get my engineering degree, and if I want to go be a high school math teacher, I could still do that. So that's kind of how I saw, like, my undergrad was just a way to have a reasonable degree to kind of fall back on because I really had no idea what I wanted to do. I kind of always knew that I wanted to teach, but teaching in public schools is kind of like a sacrifice. Like, I think that the people that are teaching in the K through 12 space are saints and are very underpaid and underappreciated. And so it was kind of hard to think that that was the path that I wanted to go down, or at least kind of expect myself to go down. So I wanted to keep my options a little bit more open with an engineering degree. I really had no interest in engineering. I just came from a family of engineers, so I knew that I had that to kind of, like, lean on in terms of getting advice and kind of knowing how to navigate that space, at least. It's not like I had anyone in the medical field that I could be like, oh, let's do that for fun. Like, it was pretty much engineering or bust for me. Like, I had no idea what else I would have done except for maybe, like, graphic design, which is a very different path. So with undergrad, I didn't really have much direction, and I still had that underlying interest in teaching. And so my sophomore year, I went to one of my freshman year professors, and I just asked if they'd meet with me and just talk about what it's like to be a professor, because this particular professor was really good at teaching and seemed to just be a happy, healthy guy. And so I wanted to kind of learn from him and see how he got where he was and just inquire about professorhood because I had no idea what that really entailed. And after talking with him, he introduced me to the field of engineering education, which I had no idea existed. He referred me to the 4 faculty members at Nebraska that worked in that space, and specifically an undergrad that was working in that space also. And I met with her, and I cold emailed those faculty members, and I met with them. And it wasn't, like, completely immediate, but it was very much like, holy crap, I didn't know that this was an option. I had no idea that my engineering degree could be quite applicable to a teaching space, because I always assumed that being a professor meant I was going to be, like, in the lab 24/7 working on some particle that was going to maybe be game changing, maybe not. And just kind of, I think that there's a huge grind involved in a lot of academic positions that I didn't really want to get sucked into. I wanted to have good work-life balance. Like, I think my dad with his engineering job was really good at creating boundaries with his work, and he was, a very present parent, and I knew that I wanted that for myself, a career that allowed me that flexibility. And so when I looked at the engineering education space, I realized that I could do engineering education research, which I hope I don't regret saying this, but to me, it is social science disguised in a STEM field. So in terms of the national scheme of, getting funding, it's valued higher than some social science. And I think that, all social science is valuable, but sometimes it's not a field that is the most stable to go into because it's looked at differently. And with, how the government views certain fields of work, it changes and it definitely evolves, but there's at least currently a little bit more stability in engineering education research because it's really important that the nation gets ahead in training highly competent engineers. And so I feel like I kind of found this loophole where I'm like, oh, I can have my engineering degree. I can still get that, learn from that, use that, but then I can turn around and just learn about engineering students and, the engineering landscape and the culture and the mechanisms of learning and all of these really interesting things to me, because I kind of have always been someone who likes math and science more so in the context of I can be decent at it, but not in I want to be in a lab 24/7 figuring out the next groundbreaking whatever. And so it was this really interesting thing where I realized that I could do research in the space, I could become an expert in conducting research on engineering students, and then I could become a professor. And so that's kind of where I learned of this path was sophomore year. So long-winded answer to your question, but I started engineering education research at the beginning of my sophomore year. I found an advisor in undergrad that was just a phenomenal match for me. And she was actually a pretty new professor. I think it was her first year. And personality-wise, we had a lot of compatibilities and just shared interests in how we operated. And so I got 3 years of undergrad research experience with a professor who was super supportive of me and really set me up for success. And by the time I graduated, it was a no-brainer that I wanted to get my PhD in engineering education and kind of turn around and do exactly what she did, which is be a full professor, not full yet, but be a professor in that space and really make an impact on how engineering is taught and the culture behind it and everything like that. So hopefully that answered your question. That was a lot.
So what are you going to teach as a professor? I'm assuming it's not exactly engineering because your research is on,
So there are a few ways that engineering education PhDs can turn around and teach. You have, to me, the most straightforward option is to teach graduate level engineering education courses. So whatever courses you take during your PhD, you can teach that at the graduate level. There is a big need to teach undergraduate courses in engineering, though. So there are options like professional development courses that are easy to get connected with because you understand those mechanisms pretty well. For me personally, I am getting my master's in mechanical engineering in addition to my bachelor's so that I will be qualified to teach mechanics courses. Wow. Typically you can teach introductory mechanics courses at a community college with your master's typically. So having that master's in combination with my PhD will hopefully make me qualified to teach mechanics courses. So For people who know which mechanics courses I'm talking about, statics, dynamics, e-bodies, like mechanics of materials, those are your like second and third year mechanics courses. So my research actually, I hope to focus on how we can teach those courses better. So I kind of don't get into them so much in the raw content wise, in terms of like, I'm not doing mechanics research and like deepening my understanding in that way, but I am deepening my understanding in how we can teach the courses better, if that makes sense. So
That is
that's my
so
goal.
awesome. I did not know that could have been a career path.
Most people
That
don't.
is so enlightening. Yeah. That is so
Yeah.
nice.
Yeah, so it's a really great mix of, I feel like my skills are being used in terms of like, I like problem solving, I like math and science, and you know, seeing it all kind of come together, but in a way that more aligns with me holistically.
So do you
Um,
think for the research part, like you're talking about like teaching classes and doing research on like how to teach them effectively, do you think that like part of your teaching classes is also going to be you like kind of testing like some of your research and theories out?
Yes, that is kind of the goal. For me, I when I think of what my ideal career looks like, it's me conducting research in my own classroom. So ideally, it's kind of an iterative approach of, you know, you use the literature that exists and you know, figure out ways that you can implement that into your classes, and then you test it. And I think that in the engineering education space, it can be really hard, and with just any educational research, it can be hard to really apply what you learn through your research in like real contexts. And so something that I've really tried to prioritize is that application of what we learn. I think that you don't want to just keep producing knowledge without testing it and actually making a difference with it. And so that to me is my goal, is, you know, how can we improve resource centers? How can we improve not just my class, but, you know, other, what we call like gatekeeping classes. Like statics is a gatekeeper course, or kind of like a weed out course, where it's big lecture halls, it's, you know, challenging content, it's teaching, you're forcing the students to learn in a different way. It's not plug and chug, it's not memorization, it's active problem solving, and you have to have a really strong foundation of the concepts to be able to progress, because that's the foundation for the rest of your curriculum. So thinking about how we can make a difference in statics can also translate to other gatekeeper courses, and, you know, have a bigger impact if you actually like test it out, in my understanding.
I think that's really cool that you like get to research kind of like any other faculty member, but you also get to apply your research, because I feel like a lot of faculty, when they research, they're doing like research papers and different labs and tests, and they just like submit everything, but like that research informs what other people do, not what they get to do.
Yeah, and it's also, I think that as the field grows, I think it's super important that people who are in engineering education faculty positions really consider the demands that the other faculty who aren't in education have. So you have all those engineering professors who are doing rigorous, time-consuming academic research, so they don't really have as much time to work on their own class, even though it's really important that they are still a good teacher, in my opinion. And so thinking about how I can make an impact through those professors who have less time, it's pretty interesting how pretty small changes that don't take that much time can make a huge impact on the students taking their course, if they just are told, hey, there's research that backs up this strategy, and if you take an extra 5 hours to just kind of reorganize your course around this, it can make a huge difference.
Wow. You said you wanted to be in K through 12 before, and then now you want to be a professor. Is it something that you love, like teaching, but also being around people who are ready to absorb information and education?
Yeah, I like I said, I didn't really think that teaching in college was a huge option for me. I didn't really understand how that space worked. So whenever I thought about teaching K through 12, I thought about, you know, teaching like AP classes like AP Calc and those higher level courses where you have students who are pretty engaged with the content. So it's definitely nice. Even just my experience being a TA in undergrad, like it's a big difference when you have students who are paying to be there and they've chosen this route and they want to get better, and figuring out how you can really like instill like motivation in them and get them where they want to go, I think is really rewarding. Because I think that, again, K through 12, there's so much respect for that space, but I think it's a lot more difficult when you have students who have different goals, different backgrounds and expectations for themselves.
That's really cool. I've always thought about it as a perspective of somebody who wants to learn, and I've been so curious about how I can be a good student, but getting your perspective that you want to deliver like quality education, that is just really eye-opening that there's other side to it.
Yeah, it's really interesting too as like a student, and seeing like how, as I was doing research in the space throughout undergrad, kind of like seeing how that changed my perspective on being a student. In undergrad, my research advisor kind of described this as artificial hardness, where professors who don't invest a lot of energy into making their course structured around learning, it introduces a lot of difficulties for the students that don't really correlate to actually learning the content more deeply, but more so just barriers that they have to overcome to survive the class. So, for example, having office hours that are only in person. If you are a commuter student, if you have a family, and you can't make it, say that's a 3-hour commitment, so you have to drive an hour there, an hour at office hours, and an hour back. Say that's 3 hours out of your day. If you can't make the drive to campus to get that help that you need, you're going to be disadvantaged. A really easy fix to that is offer Zoom office hours. And that's something that we've seen instructors implement more and more. And I think that it's small changes like that that kind of just reduces those unnecessary barriers, because having that barrier isn't making the student learn more or like challenge the student in a productive way. It's just making it harder. Same thing with kind of gatekeeping lecture notes. If an instructor is writing down lecture notes, say on an iPad, as they're projecting it to the class, and they refuse to share the lecture notes, it's just one more way that the students have to kind of like fight for how they can survive in the class. And, if they have friends in the class where if they were sick a day and they're able to just ask that friend, it's not as big of a deal. But some of those, again, like a commuter student who might not have as big of a social connection on campus, then they are kind of left trying to make up for that barrier that was put on them. So it's really just little things like that that can make a huge difference if just thought about properly.
This is so excellent, Emily. At U of A, there was this one session I was attending, and it was our women's basketball coach. She was speaking, Adia Burns, I think that was her name. She was really cool, really famous at the university. And she talked about resiliency one day, like how to be resilient. And a lot of people, she said that I tell my students, my players, that no matter what happens, you show up. No matter what setback, like I have kids, I have family, I show up every day regardless of what happens. And there were some people sitting next to me and they're like, she is just denying or ignoring the concept of mental health completely. And I was like, no, that's not what she's implying. And so there's just such a thin line between mental health and being resilient. And I feel like what you suggested, coming up with options like, suppose Zoom meeting, it's like you walk half the way and they will walk half the way. Like they will show up on Zoom and you do that Zoom office hours for them, can like bridge that gap, because I really don't know like how can you bridge that gap otherwise. Like it's such a thin line between being resilient and also taking care of your mental health.
Yeah, I definitely think I think the term typically used in literature is mental health versus mental toughness. And I'm definitely someone who thinks that mental toughness is absolutely important because there are going to be days when you don't want to show up, but you should show up.
Yeah.
And I think that it's often misunderstood when, we're talking about, because I've done, like, I've published papers with mental health in the title, right, where we are talking about students' mental health. And for some of the more traditional professors, they see that as kind of giving students an easy way out and kind of not making them as resilient as mentally tough. And
Yeah.
I kind of think of it as the opposite, because if we can encourage them to take care of themselves and be mentally healthy, they're going to be more capable of more mental toughness. And if you look at the content itself, if you reduce those barriers that don't contribute to the students' learning, it's likely that they will learn better and more deeply. And if we can invest in addressing those unnecessary barriers in foundational courses, then we can strengthen their foundation of understanding of the content, which will then help them for the rest of their career. And so I think it's interesting hearing different people's perspectives on that topic, because to me it's not at all a point of weakness. It's just a different approach that we're not used to seeing, because engineering had such like military foundations, and a lot of it was you just got to be tough. But if we're really trying to build strong problem solvers, then you need to kind of consider the whole picture, because one's ability to problem solve is impacted by quite a few factors.
Do you know if this is like a field for other like academia departments as well? Because like a lot of the things you're talking about, I feel like apply just like generally to students as well. So is like engineering education, like do they have that for like education and business, or education and what else?
Econ.
Yeah.
I can't say that I'm the best person to answer that in terms of like I haven't been immersed in the literature long enough, but there's definitely like education in different contexts that focus on these things. So, in the K through 12 space in higher education, like there's research that's done. Kind of back to the funding thing, I feel like that's where it kind of comes down to what is considered valuable. I think that engineers right now, with how politics are, we want to invest in computer science education, in other STEM education, engineering education, because that builds it builds a more appealing argument for, the government to fund. So when, we're writing grant proposals, it's, research isn't really conducted if you don't have the funding to do it. But in terms of the national scene, I think that when we're building our arguments for funding, we're saying, hey, we're losing engineering students in this course. When we're losing engineering students, especially those from diverse backgrounds, we are weakening the diversity of the engineering workforce for the United States. And when that happens, we are not able to see engineering problems from many different angles. And that weakens the country in terms of how much innovation can happen. So I absolutely think that research is done in different fields, but in terms of the getting national funding, pretty much every grant, to my very limited knowledge, that I see has some sort of logic like that implemented into it. And my guess is that it's harder to build as appealing of an argument in other fields right now, at least, is my best guess. But
That's really cool that you can actually like kind of project out what the workforce is going to be based on what classes people are passing and failing right now.
when I was writing a fellowship application to the National Science Foundation, I proposed a study that investigated financially disadvantaged students in statics, so in a second year engineering mechanics course. The reason that I focused on financially disadvantaged students was because it brings in a lot of diversity. It brings in your first generation college students. It brings in your students from lower income. It brings in oftentimes people from a lot more diverse backgrounds. And so when students are faced with barriers that are often connected to their economic status, like they have to work 30, 40 hours a week in addition to being a full-time student in order to afford school, that's going to really dampen their ability to thrive in engineering school, because engineering school is very demanding, and if you have to work that much to pay for it, especially those students that are just above the Pell Grant threshold, like they don't get like the scholarships that people below that threshold will get, but they're still not able to like truly be supported, and so they have to work a lot. When you take those working hours into account, that's taking time away from them being able to study. And so that's where it's really important to address those unnecessary barriers, because if these students are dropping out of engineering school because they can't survive the classes, that is literally reducing our pool of the engineering workforce. Like, we are not getting students who have different perspectives to offer, and that we can, like, diversity in terms of how we see a problem is so important. So it's very interesting seeing how like each project seems to be framed around that in some way.
That's kind of interesting that you like talk about that though, because I think Ananya and I, when we were thinking about like topics for this, we were like, oh, like you're doing academia and we're doing like business corporate. But I feel like you actually have a lot of that like business and like economic lens that you're looking at things through, but you're just applying it in academia.
Yeah.
Yeah, I honestly think that to me, being a professor is very entrepreneurial in nature. It's just not as risky. I mean, the risk takes a different form, you know, because I think that I have high hopes that I will hopefully be able to be a professor at some point, but like there's no guarantee. And so it's interesting how it kind of like the mechanics of it all is very similar, but it's just, yeah, it takes a different form.
There's no guarantee of anything. The job market is so bad. Even that's a risk, and your business working out is a risk. Everything's a risk. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, this has been a great conversation with Emily. If you want to hear more from her, we're actually doing a podcast with her next week where we're going to explore what wellness looks like for us post-grad. And with that being said, we're looking forward to catching up with you next week.
So my goals first for wellness is no sugar, no coffee.
She drinks
I
coffee.
really